come on. Every time. What's up everyone, it's Ross Wilson here, and today we're going to look at how we can take a boring sequence like this and turn it into something a little bit more interesting like this. Now we have kind of 6 different ways here that we can move around with this. When we're writing songs, we generally stick to just this area of the fretboard. I see it so many times, and yet there's this whole other area to explore and get some more interesting chord voicings out of. But it can be a little bit daunting of where do we go and what sort of shapes do we need to play. Because once you start moving around up here, we are well out of our comfort zone. So the chord sequence that we're going to use today then is just simply C, D, and 2 lots of E minor. This is a chord sequence that I've used a lot in my band at Killer, but rather than playing down in that one, we're going to see how we can move this around the fretboard. So the first way that we can do this then is by still staying around in the open position, but starting to experiment around with some extension shapes such as susses and sevenths, and see how we can create almost like an anchor point within the chord sequence there. So instead of playing the C to begin with, we're going to start with the C add 9, the chord that when everybody finally plays it realises how much better these shapes are than bland C chords. C add 9 is basically a tiny G. Same shape as a G, just moved down a string there. From there, instead of playing our D, we're going to do a D sus2, where we just remove the bottom finger of the D shape there. And then finally, we're going to do an E minor 7. Now notice throughout this whole song I've kept an anchor point where this finger is basically going to stay still between each transition. And then I could lift and do a different way of doing a minor 7 there. What I love about this sequence is that that finger just stays still all the way through. I'm all about trying to make things as lazy as possible when we're moving. But musically, it's quite nice because you have one note that's present, just anchored throughout the entire piece there, and you can always hear it ringing out. It's also really good for your finger exercises as well, because you're trying to practice doing chord shapes whilst keeping one finger down, and that's just going to help with your finger independence there. So why do these chords sound better then? Why do they sound different to the ear? One thing that I wish I learned when I was first starting out guitar is that scales and chords are not 2 separate things, they go together. So every chord is taken from a scale. In simple terms, we've got our major scale, which is made up of 7 notes. Your chords within that, a minor or a major chord, is just simply taking 1, 3, and 5 of the notes within this major scale. When you start seeing extension shapes, things like sus2s, sus4s, 7s, what you're doing is the number on the end of that chord is basically the note that you're adding in from the scale. Sometimes we'll take away another note in the scale to make it work, but by adding in that extra note, so in this case the C add 9 there, that extra note is what makes the chords sound different. Now this isn't meaning that every time we play a chord sequence we should try and replace a chord with one of these more extensions. It may not work, but it's always worth trying. So I always say to my students, once you've learnt these kind of shapes, go back in songs that you already know, try them out within them, see if they work. So what happens then if we start to move these shapes up the fretboard a little bit? Let's just go back on that C add 9 shape. Now another thing I always try and get all my students to learn is some notes on the fretboard. Most importantly, the top 2 strings, because you can keep a lot of these chord shapes the same and just shift them up to the different root notes. So I've got my C add 9 here on the 3rd fret root. if I move it up to the 5th fret, keeping the same shape, then I'm going to get a D add 9. And I'm making sure I play these open notes around it as well, because I like that extra kind of dissonance and clash in there. And then if I move that shape up 2 more frets to the E, suddenly doesn't quite sound right. We're just going to drop that finger back 1 because we want a minor shape here. And make sure we include that top string. Wherever possible, we always want to make sure we use that top string because that is a very low sounding. It thickens out the chord. There's a big part of your chord is with that top string. If you miss it out, your chord can sound a bit thin. So another way that we can swap these chords out to something nicer and start to move around the fretboard is to change the voicings a little bit. So when we play our open position chords, we've got those 3 notes that we mentioned before, all stacked on top of each other, and in some cases we're doubling up the notes as well. One way to really get that kind of emotional sound out of your playing and to move around the fretboard a bit more is to use open voicings. So this is quite similar to a power chord shape, but just with some added notes on. So you're going to start with a power chord there, over on the C, and we're just going to add the 3rd note in the scale, so down here, a little finger on that 2nd string. Now there's a couple of ways you could pick that. We can strum it to include the other notes. That gives a different kind of feeling to if we were to just pick those strings. All we've got to do then is slide that chord up and we get our D major shape. Now as we go up to the minor, we have to just change our finger across there, and this is just basically looking like a same as a bar chord shape but without the bar. So why does this open voicing work then? So our ears work in a way that we pick up the highest frequency. Anything that's kind of low is a nice accompaniment, but like when you're harmonizing a melody, our ears will always tend to work towards the highest note. So by putting the thing that makes the chord, the 3rd, on the top of the voicing, if I play the right shape, our ears will always hear that top melody note. So if I add an extra one in to make a minor 7 there, because I'm just going to take again the 7th note in the scale for the E minor, pop it on top, my ear's going to lean towards hearing that as something that's slightly different. So now that we've done our open voicings here, let's see if we can combine in our 9th chords that we've already done at the moment and the open voicings. So instead of having that crushed up pattern that we had before there, we're now going to split this up to quite a stretch of a shape here then. And this is a great way, if you're going to work in distortion, of having some thicker power chord sounds as well. So essentially all we're doing, instead of having our power chord shape, we are just adding 1 extra note on the bottom of that. So we'd be going 3, 5 and 7. Bit of a stretch, but this would be your 9th note on the bottom there then. Great way to spice up the power chords. We're going to take that 1 step further and just add in the bottom 2 open strings as well. This is going to change it from just being a 9th chord and just add a bit more of a clash, but I quite like the dissonance there. Now those open strings don't always work. There'll be some places where, you know, they'll sound different. So I always quite like them in the 4th and 6th frets. But there'll be areas where you get a different sound in each one. So basically have a play around with these 9th shapes, bringing in the open notes, see if it works. So the next way we're going to work with then is inversions. Inversions is basically when we just take our nicely stacked notes of chords and we just change them around to have a different bass note. Sometimes this might look like a slash chord. We're going to do them a bit higher up and still use these open notes because I just like them. So the final exercise is combining a lot of this together, is taking our 9th chords, mixing them with some open voicings, and also including a note on the top string so that we can really hear it ring out to our ears. So how do we go about doing this shape? We'd basically just start with our bar chord pattern, lift the bar and remove the little finger. So we've got that open voicing, which will be going down here on 8, 10 and 9. And then with the little finger, I'm just simply going to add that right the way down on the bottom string on the 9th, and that's going to create the add 9 and also give us that high melody for the ears to listen out for. We can include some of the open strings as well, but depending what key you're in and where you're playing around with, this may or may not work. And then we're simply going to move that up. And then we can play around with that top melody there. So that's pretty much all we've got for the video then, and there's 6 ways that you can start to move out from just playing the same old chords and have a look at what else is possible on the fretboard. Try and move away from that open area, explore the rest of the fretboard, and you'll start to get those more kind of like emotional sounding chords, but you can change these out for any notes. A lot of this isn't just sitting down and working out with the theory of like what note works here. A lot of it is just using your ear and experimenting. Like you kind of see through those examples, I'm throwing in some of the open strings wherever I want to, and I'm just seeing, does it work? Does it kind of create what I'm after? Whenever I'm doing chord sequences, I like there to be a bit of dissonance in with it. I like that clash of the notes, and I find that sometimes that's just what's missing in those basic sort of chords that we usually write all the time. So have a play around with it, try the examples. If you want to get all of the tabs from today's session, then do follow the link in Patreon below, where you can also get access to a year's worth of guitar lessons just for the price of 2. It's well worth doing, or you can continue to just rewind this video over and over again. I don't mind, up to you. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.